Well, back in the 1960s, they said rock music wouldn't last. How wrong they were. This year, the Rolling Stones celebrate 50 years together. It's quite a task to select 80 images from those 5 turbulent decades and tell the story of this remarkable group. But that's exactly what one art gallery in Sydney has done. Mark Bannerman went along to see what they've chosen.
For the first time in 3 years, the Rolling Stones!
They've been described as the greatest rock and roll band in the world. Or to put it another way, they're a photographer's dream.
We're going to see how beautiful you are.
Now, you photographed the Stones. What's the hardest thing about photographing them?
It's not hard. That's the beauty of it. It's not hard at all. It's the Rolling Stones. They're in front of you. 5 amazing characters. Because they give you access.
The question is, how do you select 60 or 70 photographs that can really do them justice?
I find it very hard to cull when you've got a calibre of work this large. But working with these sorts of photographers, what you have to do is just go through and select a chronological period and try and showcase it as best as possible.
Tully Udovich from the Blender Gallery is the person who's been crazy brave enough to take on the task. Contacting the best rock photographers in the world, she then set about making choices, with one guiding principle. Each photograph had to add something to the band's story.
The Stones started out in 1962 and 63 as a very defining point in music. They're sort of seeing a new culture of music and a new breed of music arriving, and I think that was very important, and also just to showcase their development, the fashion, the style, the music, everything about them, and to what they've become today, which is a much more larger-than-life version of what they used to be.
What they used to be is here in these photos from 1963. Taken on the streets of Soho in London.
That particular photographer is Terry O'Neill. What's unique about that shot is it's quite defining in terms of the moment of style with the Stones. A lot of the photographs previously of the Rolling Stones before that particular shot, you see them in sort of matching coats or sort of workman wear or little tweed jackets. They're sort of, I guess, replicating the Beatles a little bit, which is really not what they stood for at all. And this particular shot really sees their style come out. They see great shoes, great jackets, their hair is fabulous. They just look like a real great rock and roll band already.
A great rock and roll band they were, and as the 60s moved, so did the Stones. By 1969, Mick Jagger was now the lead in a feature film.
There's been a mistake. You can't have the room. What? It's not for rent.
But he still couldn't quite escape the photographer's lens.
Baron Wolman, who was the first photographer for Rolling Stone magazine, was actually on set with The Who doing photographing the rock opera Tommy. And once they'd finished photographing, Pete Townsend said, "Oh, let's go over to this house over in Kensington. Mick Jagger's shooting a film. Let's go and cause some ruckus on the set." So they just sort of went and broke into the set and hung around and just had some fun, and Baron snapped away while he was doing it. So he really did get some great candid shots of Mick on the set of Performance.
Getting on the inside of the Rolling Stones is every photographer's dream. Tony Mott is one of Australia's best-known lensmen, and he knows what it's like to be inside the Stones bubble.
The day I arrived, I got taken backstage into the catering, and there was Ronnie and Keith playing pool, and I was introduced to them. I was in it. This is the guy who's going to be the photographer on the tour, and you get full access. You can go back and take photos. And yeah, they're very kind and generous to photographers. That doesn't mean you can go around annoying them, taking photographs every 10 seconds, but you do get access, and consequently, you've got 5 amazingly charismatic characters in front of you.
Keeping that in mind, I asked him to pick his favourite shots, and surprise, surprise, he headed immediately to this one of Keith Richards.
If that was being taken in the modern era of the band, someone would style it, almost set it up. That's real. That's Keith with his Jack Daniels, his Coke, the alcohol on top of his amp, and he's still looking like Keith. He's the good-looking guitarist in the Rolling Stones. Not that he's not good-looking anymore, but he's not worn. It's that period. And, you know, Mick doing his singing at the front, the stage, that's just a great photograph. Presumably the photographer's just popped up and taken that shot very quickly. It's just a great photo.
So what's the curator's choice? Mick Jagger, perhaps? Well, no. An Ethan Russell shot of, you can guess who. The photo says it all. But there is a backstory.
He's standing looking so nonchalantly Keith. I mean, you know, he's got the tousled hair and he's wearing his Keith outfit, and he's standing underneath a sign that says, "Patience please, a drug-free America comes first." And I mean, it's just so typically Keith. The interesting thing about that photograph is that it nearly didn't come to pass, because Ethan saw the moment, took 2 snaps before a customs official came up and threatened to take away his camera and film, and Ethan just politely backed away and, knowing what he had, just put his camera back in his bag, and he really did have some gold.
Of course, not all the great shots in the 60s and 70s. As the band evolved, so did the photographers and the styles. It's hard to imagine Keith Richards allowing this shot in his prime. But that's the point. As Tony Mott found out when he shot the Stones, they were always looking for something new.
The first time I did a European tour with the Rolling Stones, obviously your egos, inflate, because, oh my God, I've been hired by the Rolling Stones, but it was pretty obvious fairly early that I was one of a few. I did my 3 weeks, and another photographer arrives just as you're finishing, and they leapfrog photographers.
Is it a photographer's heaven, this band?
Absolutely, absolutely. The height of a rock and roll photographer's dream is touring with the Rolling Stones. If you can name someone, better to tour with, I've simply not heard them. No one can play that many classics and play rock and roll. And Keith smells of rock and roll, and Mick moves like rock and roll.
Indeed, and that exhibition is on at the Blender Gallery in Sydney. Mark Bannerman reporting there.